Molech is a name you may not recognize. He was a pagan god from the ancient world, and he shows up in various places throughout the Old Testament. Molech was an oppressive god who demanded much from his subjects, particularly the sacrifice of children. You may be tempted to think that Molech is just a story from the ancient past. He's long lost to the pages of history. But I'm here to tell you that Molech is making a comeback in 21st century America. There are a number of verses that we find in the Old Testament that refer to this God and his particular characteristic of demanding from his subjects the sacrifice of their children. He produced a culture where the culture saw children as a commodity that were used to further their own advancement. Let me show you some verses in the Old Testament. In Leviticus chapter 18, verse 21, Israel is told this: "You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." God actually speaks of Molech not in general terms, but calls out this particular pagan god by name. Now, we know that false gods are really just various manifestations of the evil one, the enemy, the devil. But this one was particularly offensive to God because of the demand for the destruction of children. In Deuteronomy 12:31, it says this: "You shall not behave this way toward the Lord your God, because every abominable act which the Lord hates, they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire for their gods." That was very early in Israel's history, but much later, right before the exile, the prophet Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 32:35, speaks about the same problem. He says, "They built the high places of Baal that are in the valley of Ben Hinnom to make their sons and their daughters pass through the fire to Molech, which I had not commanded them, nor had it entered my mind that they should do this abomination to mislead Judah to sin." The prophet says that God's words are that this particular abomination is so outrageous, the destruction of children for the advancement of a culture. It is so outrageous that God actually says, not only did I not command people to do this, it never even crossed my mind. That's how bizarre the sacrifice of children as commodities to advance an ideological agenda in a culture seems to be. Well, how is this played out in our day? Well, there's obviously the topic of abortion, but that's not really where I want to go today. But this is the week of the Democratic National Convention, and I find it particularly distasteful that Planned Parenthood has established a mobile clinic in the parking lot of the convention center where they are offering free abortions. And yesterday they celebrated that in one day of that mobile clinic being open, they performed 10 abortions. In other words, I don't know how many people went to the Democratic National Convention this week, but there are 10 human beings less who will be going home. They have an inflatable IUD, a contraceptive device, supersized and inflated to celebrate this culture of death, this loyalty to a God that demands our children. Well, it's not just abortion. It's also after the children are born and we begin to raise them. It turns out that the culture has such an insatiable hunger for the destruction of children that they have to do something that is really mind-boggling. That is, they have to separate the rights of parents from the actions of children, and they substitute the government as a representative of the culture. Let me give you some examples. In 2013, more than 10 years ago, the state of Montana passed what they called the Parental Consent for Abortion Act. It was simply a law that they put in place in Montana that said in order for a minor to have an abortion, it required notarized parental consent. It didn't outlaw abortion for minors. It simply said a parent needs to be involved in this process. A document that's notarized by those who witness the signatures is necessary. But apparently, for Planned Parenthood, even that kind of parental oversight for something as significant as an abortion is too much for them to tolerate. So Montana has been on a crusade for the last 10 years to eliminate the Parental Consent Act. Through ongoing legal challenges brought by Planned Parenthood, they finally have overturned that law. The Supreme Court in Montana has ruled that that law is unconstitutional according to the state constitution. They said that so-called procreative autonomy, it should not be limited by parental control of minors. In other words, a minor can have procreative autonomy. They can make their own decisions when it regards reproductive rights, particularly abortion. Justice Lori McKinnon penned the majority opinion, and she tried to make the argument that their decision was not based on supporting abortion. It was just based on the weakness of the parental consent law. In other words, if the law had been written better, this wouldn't have happened. Except that Planned Parenthood never argued in the case that the law was poorly written. They argued that constitutional rights to abortion for minors had been infringed. The justices tried to hide behind this idea that it was just a poorly written law and we're just asking them to redo it, when in fact, the pro-abortion lobby celebrated the decision by saying young Montanans can now make important prenatal and other pregnancy-related care decisions. They have a right to privacy and the ability to have an abortion. Well, I find this whole conversation fascinating, if not nauseating. In the state of Montana, I looked it up. In the state of Montana, teenage girls are not considered old enough to legally get their ears pierced without parental consent. A teenage girl, and this is what it actually says, because of their underdeveloped brains, they are not allowed to take a Tylenol pill at school from the school nurse without parental consent. We live in such a bizarre intellectual matrix that we won't let children take Tylenol. We won't let children choose to pierce their ears. But now Montana says children have the right to decide to legally kill an unborn baby without parental consent. You see, that is a culture bowing down to Molech, a god who demands that children are the price to be paid in order for the culture to have the unrestrained freedom that it demands. Well, it's not just Montana. California, under Governor Gavin Newsom, just recently passed a law that makes it the first state in the nation to ban school regulations that require teachers to inform a child's parents about his gender identification change. In other words, California now has a law that makes it illegal for a teacher to tell a parent if a child at school is trying to change their gender. Now, Governor Newsom, in the kind of typical doublespeak that's characteristic of Orwell's book 1984, he said this: the new law is designed, this is a quote, to keep children safe while protecting the critical role of parents in the child's development. He goes on to say, this law protects the child-parent relationship by preventing politicians and school staff from inappropriately intervening in family matters and attempting to control when and how families have deeply personal conversations. that is breathtakingly disingenuous. He's wrapping it as if they're protecting the family relationship from government intrusion, when in fact, what they're doing is they're regulating government's ability to not let parents come into the conversation about their own children. There are stories that I've read of children in so-called equality clubs. That's one of the euphemistic names that are used for after-school clubs in public schools across the country. Equality clubs are sometimes called UBU clubs. They are nothing short of lesbian, homosexual, and transgender recruiting stations. In fact, Abigail Schreier in 2021 published a viral expose where she captured she came across some leaked recordings of conversations between teachers at a conference of the California Teachers Association. In those conversations, the comments revealed deliberate plans by teachers to subvert the influence of parents who might otherwise object to their child's new identity. They were talking about precise instructions for middle school teachers who wanted to form LGBTQ clubs like the ones that I've mentioned, equality clubs or UBU clubs. The teachers boasted about electronically surveilling their students so that they could recruit students when attendance runs low. One teacher actually said, I look at the search history of my class computers, and if I find a child who has searched anything related to sexual identity or homosexuality or anything like that, I then invite them to the club. We recruit. And she goes on to say, sometimes you have to do that to get bodies in the door. But teachers were also encouraged to keep no club records in order to maintain plausible deniability. That is, if parents ask outright whether their child was a member of this club, the teachers could shrug and vaguely say, yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure. We don't have any attendance records. This law allows teachers to not talk to parents about significant moral quandaries that teenagers are going through, and it boxes parents out of the conversation, and it makes the case that the reason for the law is because parents who are traditional, that is, parents who don't buy into the multiple gender ideology, parents who believe that men are men and women are women, the thing that everybody believed 5 minutes ago, those parents are now considered to be a threat. You don't bend your knee to the ideology of Molech sweeping our nation, then you are no longer fit to parent. And the government knows best. This law will allow California to intervene like a traditional parent is an abusive parent and remove that child from the home. To quote one of the teachers at that conference, she said, if you want to bring a new world into existence, it seems that a good place to start is with other people's kids. Folks, I don't know exactly how to approach this. I spend a lot of time in preparation for Truth Currents trying to take the events of our day and frame them biblically so that I can think true thoughts, so that I can come to conclusions based on truth. But I have to tell you, these kinds of stories push me to the edge, because the only conclusion I can come to is that Molech, the God who demands the death of children, the destruction of innocence, Molech is alive and well in this country. And we have politicians who aren't really politicians. They are high priests of a mystery religion devoted to death. I really hate using apocalyptic language when it comes to elections. I believe that God is sovereign. I believe that eternity is ultimately what matters. I live by faith and not by sight. But I have to say, I've been placed in this generation, as have you, And if you're an American citizen, you have an obligation to be involved in the civic process of trying to put people in positions of influence who have some level of grasp of the fact that they are accountable before God for the leadership that they provide to this nation. We've sat on the sidelines too long, and we've gone to church, and we've sung our songs, and we've attended our classes, and we let the culture around us literally go to hell. Well, now we're there. So the question becomes, will we cuddle up behind our closed doors and just try and wait it out? Or will we step up to our pulpits and our classrooms and decide that we are ready to finally be the church, and we will vote according to biblical standards, not political propaganda, not who we like or who we don't like. What is true? What is the best option to redirect a nation? It's time we have a come to Jesus moment as the church. Because the fact of the matter is, Jesus is still king, but our nation worships Molech. You ready for this battle? Because if you're not, the battle is lost. But I'm here to tell you, we worship the King, and no battle is lost as long as we stand on the Word of God. This is Truth Currents.